Page 19. The students visit the Botanical Gardens. Everyone left his lunch on his seat and got off the bus. The students waited on the sidewalk with Pastor Altruth while Mr. Friendson drove the bus to a special place marked off just for buses. Then he locked the bus and walked to the place where the school group was waiting. Pastor Altruth spoke to the worker standing at the front of the garden. "I'm Pastor Altruth, and these are the students from Highland School. I spoke to someone earlier to tell him I would be bringing our students here for a field trip." "Yes," said the worker, "you spoke with my helper. We are glad you've come, and we know you will enjoy your visit to the lovely Terra City Botanical Gardens. Have a nice day." "Thank you," said Pastor Altruth. "I am quite sure we will enjoy it." Visiting a tropical conservatory. "There are 3 conservatories for us to see," explained Mr. Friendson. "I think we will go first through the conservatory that has plants that grow in a hot, wet climate. Sometimes that kind of climate is called tropical." When the students stepped inside the tropical conservatory, they were a little surprised. "It feels hot and damp in here," they said. Vines and tall grasses were growing all around. Beautiful orchids were growing and blooming on the trunks of trees and on tree branches. The students could see the roots of orchids growing on the outside of the trees. "Most of the tropical orchids are air plants," explained Mr. Friendson. "They are called air plants because they get most of the water and minerals they need from the air through their long roots." Page 21. "Come over this way, students," announced a guide. "I would like you to watch a short presentation about unusual tropical plants. One of the plants you will see in this presentation is an unusual orchid called a bucket orchid. When the bucket orchid opens in the morning, it gives off a very good smell, and a certain kind of bee is attracted to the smell. These bees fly to the bucket orchid and land on it. After they land on the bucket orchid, one by one the bees fall down inside the flower. At the bottom of the flower is a liquid. When a bee tries to get away, it cannot fly out. As a bee is trying to get out of the liquid, it sees a hole near the bottom of the flower. When the bee goes through the hole, its back becomes covered with pollen. Pollen is a fine yellow dust needed by plants to produce seeds. The next day, the same bee will be attracted to another bucket orchid. There it will leave the pollen from the other flower. The bee falls down inside this bucket orchid also, and becomes covered with pollen again. What a surprise it must be for the bee when it falls down into the liquid. I wonder if the bees get tired of falling down inside the bucket orchids day after day, asked Pudge. "Well," said the guide, "I really don't think the bees mind very much. I'm a believer, and I believe that God does everything for a reason. The bucket orchids and the bees are doing exactly what God made them to do. There would be no bucket orchids if God had not made bees to carry pollen from one orchid to another. The pollen from one bucket orchid helps another bucket orchid produce seeds. Then more bucket orchids will grow from the seeds. The bucket orchids and the bees are just doing what God made them to do." Pudge spoke up again. "We should do just what God made us to do each day too." Page 23. "In the presentation you saw a plant with a very, very large flower," said the guide, "and the flower was dark red. That plant is a Rafflesia plant. The Rafflesia is a tropical plant that has the largest flower in the world and weighs up to 24 pounds, 11 kilograms. The Rafflesia grows under the ground and takes minerals from the ground and roots of other plants. While it is growing big underground, you do not know it is there. You only know it is there when you see the giant bloom of the Rafflesia plant as it opens above the ground. The bloom lasts only for a few days, however. This unusual flower gives off a strange smell. It smells something like an old piece of bad meat. Flies are attracted to the smell. The flies get pollen from the Rafflesia and carry the pollen to other Rafflesia plants. The guide explained to the students, God made flies to be attracted by the bad smell of the Rafflesia plant. The pollen carried by the flies to other Rafflesia plants makes seeds for new plants. Only a creative God could create such an unusual plant as this one. Page 24. The presentation also included a very tall and unusual plant called the Kerubi, said the guide. The Kerubi grows very fast and sometimes as much as 9 feet or 3 meters tall. It also has hundreds of flowers growing within it. This conservatory does not house a Kerubi plant. Do you know why we do not have a Kerubi plant here? Asked the guide. Is it too tall? Asked Christy. No, it is a tall plant, but that's not why we do not have one here. We do not house a Kerubi plant here because the flowers of the Kerubi smell so bad. However, the smell of the flowers attracts bees that carry pollen from the flowers of one Kerubi plant to the other Kerubi plants. As the students left the conservatory, Pastor Aldrich said, Our God is certainly creative. He created plants on the 3rd day of creation and insects on the 6th day. God knew certain insects would need certain plants. He also knew certain plants would need certain insects. God made them only 3 days apart. He knew they would need each other to live. God is thorough. He thought of everything.